Thank you so much, Tammy. Thrilled to be back for day two. I know that you said we were done with housekeeping notes for the time being, but I do want to remind everyone that the first 100 participants to join with the Zoom link each day and stay for the full session are eligible for a wellness credit that will be sent to you in the mail. I'm pleased to have so many participants and excellent presenters join us today. Though people living with episodic disabilities face many challenges, the people gathered here today online show the great strength across the community. Our next two presenters will focus on setting the stage for success and overview of the Pan-Canadian Strategy for Disability and Work. We will have time after both presentations to take any questions. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, Maureen Hahn. Welcome, Maureen.
Hi, David. Thank you very much. And of course, I'm joined by my colleague, Emile Tampa.
Hello.
Excellent. So, Emile, take it away. I think you're starting today's session.
Sure. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And I'm pleased to be able to present our strategy for you today. My name is Emile Tampa. I'm white, older, gender-neutral person with short gray-brown hair, and I'm sitting in my living room / office, like many of us are. And I'm presenting here with Maureen Hahn, my colleague, who's been part of this strategy development over the last few years. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to present to you this Disability and Work in Canada strategy. We have a short presentation of 15 minutes, so Maureen will take part in the second half of the presentation and will give you a high-level overview of the strategy. There is links to the full strategy at the end of our PowerPoint presentation, and it's available on the CRWDP website, that's the Center for Research on Work Disability Policy website, as well as the CCRW website, so it's widely available. Let's go to slide 2 then. Okay. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'm starting here with one of the initial goals of the Disability and Work in Canada initiative that was to develop a vision and strategy for increasing the employment of persons with disabilities that would inform and guide the efforts of government, employers, and other stakeholders. So that strategy has already been developed. We've been working on it with people across Canada, the community groups, policymakers, governments, stakeholders of all sorts were participating in the development of this strategy, and is now available for you to download, as I mentioned, on our respective websites. It was developed with civil society. We had lots of consultations across Canada. It's meant to be a voluntary strategy as well, so we hope that all Canadians will embrace and advance this strategy voluntarily. And we are now promoting the implementation of this strategy in a big way. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the purpose of the strategy is to provide a framework for key community stakeholders, persons with disabilities, employers, labor, researchers, and all levels of government that identifies collaborative activities to increase meaningful paid employment of persons with disabilities in Canada. Slide 4, please. Next slide. So the strategy starts with a vision statement. This is our overarching goal. This is where we would like to be, hopefully in the near future. So our vision is that employment throughout Canada is inclusive, where persons with and without disabilities have equal and equitable opportunities and choices in their careers, their jobs, and the work that they choose to do. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we have a diagram which I will describe to you. This diagram presents all of the key components of our strategy. It includes 2 pillars on each side. These are the core pillars. It's about disability confident and inclusive workplaces as one of the pillars on the left side. And then it has comprehensive supports for persons with disabilities as another key pillar on the right side. The foundation is built on effective partnerships. So we have that presented at the bottom of the slide diagram, which is the foundation for this diagram. Then we have the strategy takes an intersectional lens and a life course perspective. So we have that listed as well in the center with persons with disabilities in a green box in the center. So they're at the center of this strategy. And it's really important to think about the various characteristics that identify people in this space. It's not just about their disabilities. We are complex social animals who have multiple facets to our personality. So it's really important to think about the intersectional lens and the life course perspective in particular, to think about our needs, our wants, our desires, our efforts in the labor market over our entire life course. The strategy also includes core values, principles, and promotes evidence-informed approaches. So we have those core values, the guiding principles, and the evidence-informed approaches at the top, and overarching canopy for all of this strategy. So that's the description of the diagram. We'll move on to the next slide then, please. So this slide provides more details about the two pillars that I mentioned in the earlier slide. What we mean by disability confident and inclusive workplaces is that businesses and employers understand the values and are committed to hiring, managing, accommodating, supporting, and retaining persons with disabilities. They also need to have the right skill sets to be able to be inclusive employers. So they have much learning to do to get up to speed. The next pillar is about comprehensive supports. And what we mean by comprehensive supports is that persons with disabilities are supported in their pursuits of meaningful employment while being assured of income and benefits that provide a life with dignity, and above all, above the poverty line. Income and benefit security are essential for people with disabilities to be able to be free to seek employment opportunities that meets their needs. They need to be free to take risks without jeopardizing their security. Next slide. And Maureen, can you take it from here?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Emil. I think this slide talks about the overarching principles. And it was very important, this strategy, as well as the Disability in Work in Canada initiative, were really born out of the UN Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD. So that's the base of what the strategy, where the strategy comes from. It's important that we recognize the principle of respecting the rights of persons with disabilities as individuals, as well as the vital role of a collective commitment to their inclusion and support. We believe in nothing about us without us. We adhere to federal and provincial territorial legislation in dealing with human rights, accessibility, and employment. And again, Emil's already touched on this, is developing effective partnerships and applying that intersectional lens and the life course perspective that is the center of the strategy, as Emil talked about. Next slide, please. And so now we're going to talk about some of examples of key proposed initiatives for disability confident and inclusive workplaces. So these are examples only. There's lots more that can be done, but these are some of the examples that we heard from the consultations that we've done with various stakeholders, as Emil had talked about. So the first one is provide supports to businesses and employers for recruiting, hiring, onboarding, and accommodating workers with disabilities. The next one is to design these supports so that they can be tailored to the context, example, the size and the sector of the employer. As much as people with disabilities are diverse, so are employers and so are businesses. Provide a one-stop shop for businesses to be able to access supports on employing persons with disabilities. Promote the understanding that disability is based on social, attitudinal, and built environments. People are not, as we all know, disability is not personal. It comes up as we are involved with the social structure that we interact with. And then the last one is create a center of expertise on accessible and inclusive design. Next slide, please. So some examples again, some examples of key proposed initiatives for comprehensive supports for people with disabilities and workers with disabilities is to, as Emil has talked about, ensure income support is adequate to avoid poverty. Ensure earnings exemptions are sufficient to encourage pursuit of employment. We don't want to be setting up barriers, extra barriers for people with disabilities who are on income support in order for them to get to find meaningful employment. Ensure that persons with disabilities have access to affordable housing. It's hard to find work and keep work if you don't have a place to live. Unbundle those income supports and employment supports. provide better transit services for persons with disabilities, provide affordable daycare, provide a universal pharmacare program. All those, the last three, of course, would benefit everybody in society. Next slide, please. So then effective partnerships, how we are going to make sure that this cross-cutting foundation of the strategies, and how some examples about how we believe this could work. So first and foremost, persons with disabilities need to be fully involved and integrated in all the key activities. That the federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments, as well as First Nations communities, work together in partnership with all other stakeholders. That employer associations, business champions, and unions work together to promote a culture of inclusion in workplaces, and that governments set an example as that key employer. That educational institutions work with stakeholders to better support the employability of persons with disabilities over their life course. And the next slide, please. And then we're talking about the other part of the diagram that Emile had talked about is the measurement accountability, that cross-cutting foundational way of making sure that we know what we're doing. We're doing what we said we were going to do, and we're going to measure what we do. So develop an outcomes framework and an outcomes-based tracking system. Identify those key indicators of progress that are toward the desired outcomes. Collect data in a way that facilitates research. Example, by linking different data sources and establishing a baseline. Develop measures of employers' disability confidence. It's easy to say disability confidence, but what does that mean? And how do we measure it? Identify gains to public and private sectors from improved employment of persons with disabilities. Develop a reporting plan to promote accountability. And lastly, create a repository of initiatives and resources that have worked well. And next slide, I think. Yeah. So, and that's it for our presentation. I think that at this point we are completed our formal presentation, and Emile and I would be happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Appreciate that presentation. It's so important, to organize and strategize together if we're going to make substantial improvements in the working lives of people living with disabilities. And a special thank you as well to you, Dr. Tompa. It's important that we have strong data to guide and help influence beneficial changes in policy and practice. Right now, I'd like to open it up to any questions that our attendees might have. Melissa, I'll send it over to you.
Thanks so much. At this point, I don't have any questions in the Q&A, but I thought I would ask you a couple questions myself. Okay, so the first one I've got is the strategy was developed prior to COVID-19, and we all know how much this has changed everything, the way we work, the way we think about it, and where we work. So how has this context impacted the strategy and its implementation?
You want to start, Maureen?
Sure. I think that COVID-19 has really pulled back the curtain on the inequities of how we treat people with disabilities. And it's very difficult to put that curtain back into place. And we don't want to do that. I think that as far as the strategy is concerned, I think that it was a bit forward thinking, especially when we're talking about unbundling supports and talking about the need for the government to ensure that there is that the boundaries around provincial, federal, and federal responsibilities are taken away. And so that people with disabilities are Canadians and or landed immigrants to Canada, and that they deserve the same rights no matter where they live in the country. And so I think that this strategy will actually support the federal strategy that is being developed under the Disability Inclusion Action Plan that is set up by Minister Qualtrough. I think that this strategy can be the base to that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very well said, Maureen. I really like that analogy, pulling back the curtain of all the inequities. It's so true. We've seen that with even the supports that the government is giving out for the CERB versus the amounts that they're offering for persons with disabilities. They are also much more hit by the opportunities that in the labor market that have been curtailed because of COVID-19. But there's always silver linings. It's forcing people to think differently and realizing that we can be creative and find new ways of working. Some people have been able to work from home now, so that's created an opportunity to avoid having to commute if that's a challenge for some people. So there are some silver linings, but I think more broadly, we're realizing to rethink the new normal of how we work, and that there's lots of people out there who have talent to offer, and hopefully people are realizing that we can be creative in how we organize work within organizations, and so hopefully this is forcing us to rethink some of those issues. And I think a lot of employers are realizing the need to change how they engage people in work, and hopefully that'll create new opportunities as we go forward. But we can't forget that lots of people are being marginalized, and we have to make sure that that doesn't erode any further, because we've made such headways already over the last few years with all the great things that the federal government is doing, supporting new initiatives and new funding, new legislation, and we just have to keep moving forward and working together to make sure nobody falls behind.
Great. Thank you very much to both of you. I now have a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I think I have time for two. So how can the presentation of the lived narrative experience of persons with episodic disabilities provide a political, cultural, and societal change?
Emil, do you want to take that, or do you want me to start?
You can start.
I think that's such a good question. It's such an important question because it's easy when we're talking about disability, cross disability and disability at large. But when we're talking about, and as Tammy had mentioned, even in her introduction, of the understanding of what episodic disabilities are, and understanding that people with episodic disabilities are people with disabilities, and we see that in the Accessible Canada Act that it's the definition is episodic disabilities are in there. But one of the things that I've noticed, and which would be very, very helpful for the strategy as well, is helping people who have episodic disabilities identify that they are a person with a disability sometimes. And then having that voice very, very strong at the table, so that so that episodic disabilities are put forward as all other disabilities are put forward as well.
Yes, I agree. And it's really important to hear about the lived experiences of persons with disabilities. We try to promote that even at our conference, where we have people tell their stories. And it's really compelling to hear those stories, because we really have to understand the actual experiences. Talking about the strategy is great. Some of it's very high level. Until we understand how people actually experience some of the things they do experience in the workplace, and their challenges, the barriers to participation, it's really not easy to understand where we need to make efforts to improve the situation for people who are experiencing these barriers. So really hearing those stories helps us contextualize and be specific about some of the things that need to be put in place for it to make it work for everybody. So hearing those stories and bringing them to the table so that it's part of the dialogue. We all have to participate in a dialogue across the country and hear people's experiences that are really the essence of what we're trying to address.
Okay, thanks very much to both of you. I have a signal that we need to wrap it up, because we're going to try and stay on time today. So thank you everyone for your questions. I will try and answer them within the Q&A if I have the answer. And thank you very much to both Maureen and Emil for being a part of the summit today. We really appreciate seeing you.
Thank you so much.